Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Stacking Sats, the show where I dive into hash rate heating and open source developments inside the Bitcoin space, try to break them down in constructive ways so that you can understand how to build them yourself and find ways to stack more sats. I'm your host, Trevor Bello, and today we're going to be doing an interview with Schnitzel. Schnitzel is an entrepreneur, a software engineer, someone who has developed and tinkered with the LOKI board and other hash rate heating projects in the past. He's specifically known for the HashTub build, something that many people have seen. You can go to Nakamoto Heating Solutions, which will be linked in the description of the show, to find out more about that. I've got a lot of respect for Schnitzel. I'm really excited to dive into this. So without further ado, let's dive right in. What is up, everybody? We're here with the interview with Schnitzel, Michael. He's been in the space for a while, and he's someone who has built several, if not, multiple in the dozens of different LOKI rigs, heat reuse applications. He's most notably known for the hash tub, or a hot tub that was heated with an immersion oil. Super cool. He took that down to Nashville just a couple weeks ago. He's been in Miami. He's been all over the place, heating up hot water, taking a spa to all over all these Bitcoin conferences. But the reason we're here today, Schnitzel, is because we're going to be talking about the LOKI Rig. The reason I want to talk about the LOKI Rig is for the purposes of this show. I'm trying to highlight to the newcomers, the new Bitcoin miners, and even people who've been in the space for a little bit but are just kind of genuinely curious. I want to highlight the story of trial and error, and then how we got from, these miners that you couldn't plug into the wall very easily. I mean, the S17 you could, but then the S19 comes around, and the barrier of entry was raised too high for most people. And then you kind of throw in this whole idea of Zach Bomsta tinkering, other people kind of tinkering and messing around with some of these iterations. And now today in 2025, we have S21s that are coming out 100 terahash, built off of a LOKI configuration, 110 volts. And these are incredible movements that we're seeing. So I would just like you to tell us a little bit of your thoughts and what you saw back in 2017 to 2020. And then after, could you kind of just break that down for us?
Yeah, happy to do so. For me, it all started with like S9s. So S9s, for anybody that knows, you could actually run them at 110 volts. And maybe we need to even start even earlier. Like pretty much anywhere in the world, you have 220 or 240 volts everywhere. So the regular power plug that you plug into the wall is 240 volts. Specifically in Europe, where I'm from, we only have 240 volts in the whole houses. It's the US that does split single phase, meaning your house actually receives 240 volts. But then what happens it is split up into twice 110, 120 volts. So your outlet in the house has only 120 volts. There are specific places in your house that you have 240, like anything that like uses a lot of energy. Let's say your dryer, or let's say if you have an electrical stove or a water heater, they're all running on 240 volts because you can get just much more energy through the same amount of cable. You need less thick cables and things like that. So an S9, the power supply was made for 240 volts, but you could also run it in 120. So people, all they had to do is they bought an S9, they plugged it in the wall in the US. They had to underclock it a little bit because the power supply couldn't keep up. But that was no problem with brains. You could just underclock it a little bit. And so, like people building space heaters, garage heaters, all kind of different things popped up because it was so easy. Obviously, the S9 has extremely loud fans, so people had to do different things. So what I've done and other people, we played around with different fan configurations. We made them immersion, used computer water cooling equipment to do immersion systems. But it was all possible, and it really sparked this movement of home mining and heat reusage. And during that time, people didn't even think about using S19s because at the bull run last time, an S19 was $10,000 to $15,000. So buying one of these at your home to rebuild it or change it, so people didn't even think about at that point. Everybody was just use an S9. An S9 was expensive enough. It was a couple of $100s, but it was affordable compared to like an S19 to do a space heater. And then, though, during the bear market, when the prices went down, Bitcoin went down, these S19s, they suddenly became affordable. We saw suddenly you paid like $2,000, $1,500, $1,000. And I remember the day when, like, the first time people talked about, hey, you get an S19 below $1,000. Suddenly, it became viable to use them again for space heaters and things like that. But there was obviously this big issue that most people have maybe 2 or 3 outlets in the house where they can connect 240 volts, and a lot of times they have to then disconnect the dryer. So like you can either dry or heat, but like you can't do both. Now, luckily for me, that wasn't a big issue. I had enough electrical knowledge that I knew how to run more 240 volts in the house, but obviously that wasn't a big thing, or most people couldn't do that. And you could ask your friendly electrician if they come and plug another 240, but I've heard of stories of people like what are you building? A lot of times people are like, are you going to grow weeds? Because that's supposedly a reason that people need random 240 volt at outlets in the house. Anyways, it's just like all this like weirdness. And yeah, that was just like, that's prohibited. So people still did the S9. You saw the occasional S19 being used for like heat reusage. But again, this was extremely niche and for only the people that really could do it. And then Zach Boomster at one point messages me on Telegram and says, hey, I think I figured it out. And I was like, what? And he's like, I think I figured out how we can run these boards on 110 volts. And obviously, when he said that, like everything changed. And so what he did is he realized, and that's the big difference between the S9 and the S19. The S9 power supply just provides 12 volts to the hashboard, and then the hashboard itself has voltage step up and step down to change the voltage based on what the chips need. And S19, what Bitmain decided is that step up and down voltage is happening in the power supply and not anymore on the hashboard. That means if you want to change the power supply, so let's say technically we could always have taken an S9 power supply and rigged it somehow up to the S19 because the computer board, like it's all 12 volt. Out of the power supply comes out 12 volt most of the time. The problem is with an S19, as soon as the control board realizes that the hashboards need more or less power, it would actually talk to the power supply. So there's a data connector between the control board and the power supply that tells it, please change the voltage. And if you hooked up any other power supply that didn't have that data line, the control board refused to start. It basically said, you have connected a non-compliant power supply, I'm not going to do anything. And what he figured out is you can just basically trick the control board into thinking that there is a power supply. And even if you just send it 12 volts all the time to the hashboards happily take whatever comes and will continue hashing. So what he figured out is how to basically mock or fake that connection between the control board and the power supply. It's a little board that you connect into the connector. You've probably seen all that in the episodes before, and that means then we can now use any 12 volt power supply to run S19s, including everybody's at home has already S9s, so we can use the S9 power supply, run it at 110 volts, and use it to run the S19 hashboards. It's still like a little bit of you had to figure it out, and I was clever enough to switch positive and negative in one of my builds and obviously fry the hashboard immediately. So it was still a little bit of a challenge, but it opened up so many more things because now we can build really efficient space heaters whenever, because you basically have 110 volts everywhere. Like you even have it in your car, you have it in trucks, you have it just everywhere. So as soon as we can do this, and obviously a lot of people, they didn't use all 3 hashboards. Most builds that you saw were just single hashboards. And you can really easily, like with a couple of silent fans, you can make really great space heaters that are ultra compact, and that really brought the possibility. And right now, if you look into the market, in terms of like the DIY builds, you find all kind of things of people like just space heaters, but also like in kids' rooms, in nurseries. I've seen like chicken heating systems built with S19s, and then if you go into the immersion, you can obviously also do that. So yeah, the possibilities are pretty much endless, and all we needed to do is figure out how do we fake the control board that it thinks it talks to a real power supply or not.
Absolutely. You know, like I remember the day that I had a buddy telling me, because I was trying to figure out how I was going to set up my 220. I was like, how am I going to run this S19? Maybe I'll create a splitter cable that comes off the dryer plug, and I'll run it on the dryer. And my buddy said, no, you can plug this little board in, get yourself an APW3 or an APW7, and just mod it a little bit, and you'll be up and running off 110. And it blew my mind, because I was very early. You know, I came in 2024 at the very beginning of the year, so the Loki board had been out for a couple of years at that point, and there had already been a bunch of different iterations of these builds. And so it was incredible to be able to say, oh well, I'll skip all of that, put that to the side, and I'm just going to run this Loki rig. And that was an incredible advantage for me coming in so late in the game. Something that I really think is cool is that we're at the point now where LOKI Rig does not mean necessarily a rig that is using the LOKI board. We're at a point now where the LOKI Rig just means a modified power supply that runs off of 110. So this could be any ASIC Bitcoin miner. You know, you could have the What's miners, the Canons, anything that you can modify into 110. And what we're seeing is, and Zach Bombs has even said this, he's mentioned that he basically obsoleted the Loki board a couple of years after he built it by figuring out how to modify this S19 power supply. And I think the APW12 comes on the S21s as well. I haven't got one yet, but I'm pretty sure it's the same. And you literally just take little 1 ohm resistors and solder those onto the brownout detectors. And as far as I understand, that up down voltage that you're talking about, the resistor just allows you to go down further. From what I understand. And that just, it literally just changes the entire game. I really do believe that mod is cheaper than actually going and buying a Loki board.
100%. Yeah, because you don't have to do that. Yeah, so yeah, what you're mentioning is what then later on Zach figured out is that you can feed the S19 power supplies 110 volts. There's just there's some detection in it that does not let it to start, and he figured out how to tell the power supply directly, you can happily run a 120 volt, like don't worry, and it happily converts 110 volts to 12 volts. Like that's what power supplies are good at. And so yeah, that's then you don't even need the LOKI kit anymore. But it's really this like, and I think that's also like what people really need to understand. It's progress happens in many small steps. Like I was one of the first person that received the first LOKI chip, and it didn't work for some specific cases. Like for some boards with some firmware, it didn't work. So there was actually iteration, and we gave Zach feedback, and then he built new versions, sent them to us. We tried them again. I then said, okay, I want to also try some immersion stuff, and we had some issues there. So yeah, it's really like a step by step. And I would say, the newest iteration is now that you can actually just modify the power supplies. I do have to say though, if you want to do it yourself, it's a little bit trickier to actually modify an S19 power supply, because you have to solder stuff in with the LOKI board. But there are now also companies that just sell LOKI rigs that are already pre-done, pre-modded, and you just get them. It's literally now just a space heater. You order it, it comes home, you plug it in, done, and you have a space heater that heats your house.
Listen, Schnitzel, the people that we're talking to today, these are tinkerers, these are builders, these are people who aren't afraid to break stuff. So I mean, yes, the soldering. I would say, get yourself a solder station. I got one back there. I think it's like $150. So that does take the overall price a lot higher than the LOKI board. But
you also learn something again.
You learn something. I mean, exactly. I destroyed one APW12 already, just trying to figure it out. So you just play around.
Everybody has that. Like I have like my wall of shame or fame of like broken stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I want to take this back to something that you said is this step function improvements that were made over time. You know, we would not be where we are in the progress, the history of the heat punks, you know, the hash rate heat punks, without the work that you and Zach Baumsta and all these other hash rate heating heat punks had put in tinkering with these machines to get to where we are today. So, you know, there is a massive amount of respect that needs to go towards the OGs who kind of started this whole movement. And, you know, that was a long way of segueing into my next question is, as we continue iterating, you know, I mentioned earlier, we have this 100 terahash S19 hash board powered 110 volt LOKI rig that Altera is developing. Where where do you see the future of home heat reuse? Where do you see the future of Bitcoin mining, you know, couple years from now, couple cycles from now?
Yeah. You know, for these type of questions, I always try to find analogies in other developments, and I can find two. One of them is in 3D printers, and then the next one like in drones. Like if you go back to 3D printers, I bought the very first 3D printer that people like made. It was like called Solidoodle, and it came somewhere from a random guy built a 3D printer, and it was horrible. Like you had to build it yourself. Half of the time it didn't work. And today you can literally go into a Walmart, you buy a 3D printer, you put it at home, and then 10-year-old can 3D print. And so, but again, there were many, 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 many steps in between. The same in the drones. Like in the beginning, I used to fly drones a lot. For the people on the video, there's one in my background, and we used like airplane parts to build drones. Like none of them were actually built for any drone things, but we just felt like, okay, if you take 4 rotors, this technically should work. But you had to learn so much about PID regulator and things like that. And now today, again, you literally walk in a Walmart or Best Buy, buy a DJI drone, and you don't even have to know how this thing works because it has so much AI in it now that it just follows you. So that's where we're going. So if you want me to guess what's going to happen, I believe the world is going to realize that these chips, so these Bitcoin mining chips, they are basically heaters that generate you money. And eventually, everything that produces heat in some way, and obviously the first ones are going to be space heaters. We see this already with the Heatbit that sells like plug and play heaters. We're going to go into water heaters, things like that. So the stuff that really needs a lot of energy, because right now these chips are still quite expensive in terms of what they're doing. So if you, let's say, want to build something in a Bitcoin-driven hair dryer that you maybe use for, depending on how much you use a hair dryer, but I mean, you're not going to run this for multiple hours a day. If the chip is too expensive, it doesn't make any sense. But I do believe the price of these chips are going to go down. Just companies that build anything with heater, they will build eventually Bitcoin miner chips. They're heated through mining chips. And so I think a world where anything in your house that produces heat in any form, so just like sit in a kitchen, like you have your water kettle for tea, you have your coffee machine, you maybe have like a fridge that generates also warm water, then obviously the dishwasher, like all these things, they all need to produce heat, and they will all in some form or another use Bitcoin mining chips to do that. And we're gonna just have them everywhere. So it's gonna become such a standard thing that you basically, if you walk in the store and you don't see one of the ones with the Bitcoin miners, you're not gonna buy one because people are gonna choose the ones that produce them money. Like it's literally possible now with just heating stuff up, we can produce money. Now, how fast is this gonna be? It's hard to say. I think probably 5 years is too short. 10 years is maybe possible. Maybe 20 years is too long. But it's going to happen because it literally makes no other sense than just heating also with producing money at the same time.
I couldn't agree more with you. You know, this is one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on the heat punk space is just the trajectory of where we're going. I mean, we can't really say how long it's going to take to get there, but we know this stuff is coming. And I feel like there were people that was talking about this, 5-6 years ago. And now we're starting to see really incredible developments coming from this space. And it as we alluded to before, it just takes time. It takes iteration. It takes people building and not being afraid to tinker. I think really that's what we're trying to embody on this show is this tinkerer spirit. And what we build, we won't really know until we get there. What it's going to look like, don't really know, but it's going to be pretty cool. It's going to be awesome. I know that I don't regret building my hash rate heater in my house. I don't regret building my LOKI rig. I don't regret breaking 5 different Linux boards and an APW 12 because I learned a lot, So I don't regret it, but there's a lot of things that I've learned, man. Schnitzel, I just want to say I really appreciate all of the work that you've put into the hash rate heating space. I know that most of this is thankless. Most of this is, just you playing around in your garage, kind of communicating with some of the other Heatpunks. But there are people like me that really, really appreciate the things that you've done. And I don't think that we could be where we are without the work that you've put in. One last thing before we wrap up. Can you just, our audience, these are tinkers, these are builders, these are people who aren't afraid to DIY and get their hands dirty. What is one final piece of advice that you would leave our audience before we wrap up?
Good question. People always ask me where I have these ideas from, or what is it like, aren't you afraid? That's a lot of times. Like, people are coming and asking me, like, but couldn't you burn down your house, or couldn't you get an electric shock? And I think, yes, this is all possible. And I definitely don't encourage people, like, play with 240 volts if it's the first thing that you do in your house, or like change the plumbing system of your house so that, like, while you're working on it, nobody else has hot water in the house and things like that. So, like, in my case, for example, like, I have a detached garage, and so from my house, so I can do a lot of stuff over here. And if I break something, the garage has no electricity, nobody's gonna, or it's just gonna be me that cares for this. So I think it's this, like, yes, be curious, try out new things, and don't be afraid of learning something. I mean, the other thing is, like, today I really believe any knowledge is completely free. It used to be, in order to become an electrician, you had to become a tradesman, and you had to learn from a master electrician. I do believe I can now today, even though having never ever got an electrical like school, I can learn as much as a master electrician. I'm probably going to offend all the master electricians out there, but I can tell you I'm a trained software engineer, and you can learn everything that I've learned in school. You can also learn online. So I'm just using that. And so therefore, but a lot of times these schools, what they generate is they give you the safe space. They give you the environment, because learning is making mistakes. And so if you want to learn yourself, I believe the information is all out there. You can watch YouTube videos, you can read books, and all these things, but create your own safe space where you can play them before you're gonna, like a tradesperson actually goes to a customer and fix their electrical system. They first train by themselves in their safe space. So build your own safe space at home where you can play with it in a safe environment, where you can make mistakes. And if you do make mistakes, it doesn't cause massive issues. And then over time, you will gain confidence in yourself. You will learn the skills. And so then later you can do them. Like in my case, like my first system that I've ever built was just heating the garage, then the Airstream, and then the house. So it's really like, it's this step that, like, think about this. So that's what I'm really encouraging. I believe you can learn anything, but understand that this is a journey. And if you maybe feel suddenly not sure anymore, yeah, don't go there. Like, don't do stuff that you don't feel comfortable. Maybe think about, can I try this maybe somewhere else first? Can I learn this maybe somewhere else? And the last thing I want to say is, like, and this is extremely cool, is we now really have a community around Heatpunks And so that's like, find these people at either events or in Telegram groups, on Twitter, on Napster. We're pretty much everywhere, and ask people. Because when I started, there were maybe 3 or 4 people on Twitter that did this, and now it's a nice community. So really reach out. If you have questions, reach out to me directly. Find the Telegram groups, because there's a lot of things we did wrong, and if we can help each other to not do them wrong a second time or a third or a fourth time, that would be great.
And that is the whole purpose behind this show, man, is I've seen all these great things coming in later in the game. You know, I come in when this community was starting to be built. There's a lot of people, like you said, who are doing these things. But what I've noticed is there's not a lot of people who are providing really detailed documentation or talking about it. They're just kind of building and telling stories from their builds. And so what my whole purpose here is to take these stories and build out some of these projects myself and document that process, you know, so that the new people coming into the scene, the people who are very genuinely curious about Bitcoin mining and heat reuse, can show up on this show and actually get some of that hands-on experience and then communicate or connect with our community. So my last thing I would say, you know, before we wrap up is, if you guys want to get connected to this Heatpunk community, just reach out to me, because I'll get you in the Telegram channel. I'll get you into some Twitter groups or whatever, and we'll start sharing our knowledge, because Schnitzel is right. This community is empowering newcomers and everyone else who's been in here for a while to build really cool, incredible things. And in order for us to get hash rate heaters in all these different devices and all these appliances, we need new people coming in, thinking of things, thinking of these solutions to these problems in a different light. So yeah, that's what I got. Schnitzel, I just want to say thank you so much. Where can the audience find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, you'll find me on Nashville on Twitter under the name Schnitzel. And if you want to see all the documentation of my builds, like the hash top that has a full parts list, schema, videos, and pictures, go to nakamotoheating.com. It's all over there. You can find them and play with it.
Yeah, I'll put that in the description of the show. I'll also link the podcast that we did on Build a Mine, because me and Schnitzel, we walked through his hash tub build, all the different components, the electrical components, the plumbing components, and the actual heating components, to kind of give you a good idea. So you can go to Nakamoto Heating Solutions to see that schema, but you can also watch the podcast and kind of have us go through it step by step. So Schnitzel, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time, and I will see you. You're gonna be in Denver, right?
Tomorrow, I think.
We're gonna see Friday. I'll be there Friday.
All right. See you there.
All right,
yeah,
brother.
I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Cool. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We got a really good overview of what the LOKI Rig is, how it came to be, how it kind of started as this small project and grew into the hash rate heaters that we see today. We kind of painted the picture of where hash rate Heatpunk space is heading, the movement is headed, because of the innovations that have started from the LOKI Rig. I really do not think that we would be where we are today if it weren't for the work of Zach Baumsta, the work of Schnitzel, the work of all these other plebs out here tinkering and building. And so it's important to highlight that we need this community. We need other people, individuals who look at these problems from a different lens and try to apply their solution. That is what open source development is all about. Whether you're working on code, whether you're working on hardware, it's all about this iteration, the step function improvement of building and figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and then going to the community and sharing that progress so that others can build off of it. So that's exactly what we're doing here on the show. That's what we're doing in the Heatpunks channel. That's what we're doing on Twitter. And it's going to be incredible to watch this journey. It's going to be incredible to be a part of this journey. So all of you that are here watching this today, you are all part of the Heatpunks movement. You are all part of a grassroots movement that is taking faster and faster steps. We are growing at a rapid pace. And, you know, Schnitzel says 5, 10, 15 years out, but I truly believe that we're a lot closer to some of these applications and appliances than some people think we are. It just takes iteration. It just takes building. And it's going to be a step function improvement once we get some of these hardware manufacturers on board with the Heatpunks movement. We start chasing heat threshold versus efficiency thresholds. So once we have boards that can actually handle the heat, we'll see a huge improvement and a huge gain towards some of these applications. All right, well, this was the LOKI Rig interview with Schnitzel. If you guys enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed what we're doing, I would appreciate a like, a share, a comment. With that, guys, I will see you on Friday for the LOKI build. We're going to be breaking down an S19, building out the LOKI rig, and showing you how to piece it all together, how to modify the APW3, and then put it all together. And then also I will have linked, as I've noted a little bit, I will have linked a build sheet so that you will be able to take that sheet, purchase all of the things that you need, piece it all together, and then use the video to actually build it. So that is my goal here, to help you build and grow your LOKI rig, your LOKI configurations. And stay tuned in the future because we're going to be doing a build out of an APW12 modification. So I'll show you how the soldering process works. I'll show you how to just solder those resistors on there to make it work. It's a lot simpler than you think it is. It's really not that hard, other than making sure you have a good solder station. So guys, I really appreciate your time today. I really hope that you're enjoying this content, and I hope that we can grow this movement faster and better than we could have. I hope that we can improve the lives of the people who are in the space and some of the people who are not in the space just by building out really cool products, really cool things. So with that, we'll see you on the next episode of Stacking Sats. Remember, guys, we have a lot of work to do, so let's get stacking.